Welcome to our midweek mailbag podcast here on the Pride of Detroit network of podcasts. My name is Jeremy Reisman. I am the producer over at Pride of Detroit, and we are here post-Vikings games, ready to talk about what happened there, ready to look ahead to Seattle, basically guide the conversation wherever you guys take it here live on twitch.tv/Pride of Detroit. And with me to help me out, back after a week off,
a week of sickness.
Managing editor of Pride of Detroit, the machine at Eric Schlitt on Twitter. Eric Schlitt is back. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, I'm doing better now. I got the flu shot and my booster, and I was fine for a day, and then it just knocked me on my butt, and I had a hard time coming back. But it took like 3 or 4 days before I was back to actually like functioning. It was rough.
Well, that seems to be kind of a common theme going around right now is not only the illness, but just being sidelined for 3 or 4 days. And I think that's probably where we're going to start our conversation today, because obviously we have news that Swift sounds like he's probably going to miss a game or two. Amon-Ra St. Brown, so we'll see. And obviously the big one, Tracy Walker, suffers an Achilles, done for the season. And so throughout
I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah. I try to go through that one as quick as possible, just to rip off the Band-Aid for you in case somehow you hadn't heard. But yeah, obviously a tough situation considering this team was already dealing with a lot of injuries before the season even started. And so we got a bunch of questions about that, and some of them we're just not going to be able to answer, like why so many injuries, right? Like I'm sorry. I wish there was one person or one thing you could point to. I know some people are talking about the turf at Ford Field and things like that. And there are studies out there that in general, grass is better on the joints and things like that than turf. But
most of these injuries have either occurred on grass in Allen Park, or Tracy's was not even at Ford Field.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
but turf.
Yeah, but not Ford Field's turf, right? I mean, so I think, look, it's common to want, when A happens, you want to know why the B result, right? Unfortunately, that's just not how things work with injuries, right? Like, that's not how. Look, if you can get hurt, trying to catch a baseball without your hand. You can get hurt trying to
without your hand.
Without a glove. Sorry. You can trip on a step while holding your baby. And you know what I mean? Like, there's so many silly little things and ways, and they're so freaky. Like, for example, if you look at the Giants Dallas game on Monday Night Football, Sterling Shepard just running in a simple straight line, no cuts, no nothing, boom, tore his ACLs, done for the year. Like, it's a freaky thing. I've tried to talk to the Lions sports science director and a couple of times, Joe Costanza, and things I there's no specifics. It's just kind of, I'm trying to like set up an interview, which has kind of been stalled, I guess. And let's just say that, but I'm interested. I'm interested in the same thing that the fans are asking. Like, is there some sort of reason why these things have occurred? And 3 Achilles injuries, and or actually 4 if you count Jayshon Cornell's 3 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And so they're building. The Lions are doing their case studies. They're 2 years into their sports science program. They're building information. They're trying to figure out why things work. And if you are familiar with how the sports science programs work, it takes a couple of years to build foundational data. And then once you do, then you can use it to kind of mitigate injuries in the future and help you have some predictive things. But injuries are still going to happen. And so I don't know. I think they're in the early stages of maybe finding something out that they weren't aware of, or maybe it's just unlucky. It's really hard to tell.
Yeah, and I think that last point is the one that we always have to drive home, because sports are random. Injuries are random, and like you said, as much as we all want to find out why A is happening and figure out the B reason, sometimes life isn't that clear cut, right? It isn't just
Sure.
one thing that's causing it. It's not the Lions are working them too hard. The medical staff isn't doing their job. Sometimes it just happens. And
Mm-hmm.
it is interesting though, because one of the things I know you looked into in the offseason was the Rams program, right? And
Yeah.
the Ram
Yeah, year. Yeah.
yeah, a year or two ago, and how
Mm-hmm.
they have remarkably remained healthy, looking at certain other stats, adjusted games lost by Football Outsiders, other metrics of just team health, and they've stayed in the top 5 consistently in the past, what, 5 years?
Yeah, but it took them like 3 years before they saw results,
Yeah,
right? And so the Lions are in the beginning of year two
right,
with theirs. So if you can extrapolate that out, maybe you see those same results,
right.
but maybe not. It's injuries.
Yeah, and the one thing that I thought was interesting that Dan Campbell said, I think it was last week when he was asked, because 3 or 4 guys had popped up with back injuries, and he was asked,
Yes.
what's the deal with that? And he says, well, I don't know. There might be something.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, there might.
that was what he said, and I kind of appreciated that. Like, he's not just gonna shrug that off and be like, injuries are random. We don't know. Like, who? Like, you're connecting dots that aren't there. He's like, maybe there is
Right.
something there. We're that's definitely something we're going to look into, so that the whole reason you have the sports science department is so you can see if there are things that you're doing or things that the players are doing, or whatever.
Mm.
Maybe they're just sitting in the wrong chairs at work. Maybe they need to change the, things like that. Or
Sure.
you look
Sure.
into all that sort of stuff. I'm sure. When you're dealing with $1 million business, you don't want to leave any stone unturned.
So maybe we should just touch on like what the sports science program is for
Mm-hmm.
those who aren't familiar. Essentially, the sports science program is a tracking type program that interworks with multiple departments within the organization. They work with coaches, they work with players, they work with the medical staff, they work with the training staff. They work with all of these different entities. And the way Jill Costanza described it to me was essentially the sports science is kind of like the hub, and all those different spokes go out to the different departments essentially. And so the sports science is trying to take information from all of these different avenues and then put them together using what they're learning, what they know about players, what they can figure out from an analytic standpoint, and they're combining all these different metrics in order to just general common sense, and trying to figure out, is there a pattern that is repeating itself amongst the players or amongst a specific player, and then they try and set up programs for how to best rehab that player. And it just takes a lot of time to get a system in place where you can utilize it effectively.
All right, I think we're going to leave most of the
Yep.
injury discussion there. I'm sure some other questions are coming, but for our live audience, keep sending in some questions. Let's move to a very simple one, because I think we can all agree that last week was a pretty it was a step back for the defense. So Papa Smurf asked, what pieces are still needed on defense? What are they missing on defense right now?
I think depth is the biggest issue, right? I mean,
Yeah,
obviously now with Tracy's injury, they are going to need someone to step up to be a starter. I think most of their plans at safety were long term, hoping that they could develop a couple of guys, specifically Kirby and Iffy. And if that gets accelerated now, there's going to be a learning curve that comes with them getting playing time. If Juju steps in, what's his ceiling? Is he just a placeholder? Is there more growth opportunity for him? It's hard to tell. So obviously in the immediate, it's safety, just because that timeline has just been so accelerated.
yeah.
I think you're going to need more depth at linebacker, even though linebackers have been playing relatively well.
Maybe the best position
Right,
on defense. Is that fair to
right.
say?
Um, man, I don't know. I think one of the most glaring needs is defensive tackle next to Aleem.
Sure.
Brockers has flashed here and there. Bugs has flashed here and there. I really haven't seen much out of Benito. Demetrius Taylor has been inactive, and so you still have, I think, a glaring hole at like each level,
Yeah.
and then kind of just overall depth. And
Right.
then, my goodness, you could get a few of these injured guys back. I mean, like, look at the edge. They invested so heavily on the edge, right? And you end up with, two guys that are still on the pup list. And you just lost Kaminsky, who's, essentially out, right?
Yeah.
So that's, three of your seven edge guys that you've put money into are all out. And Kaminsky was leading the team in pressures, and Aquara was supposed to be a starter, and Pascal's the second round. I mean, these are important players, and so, if you can get some of those guys back, and that'll help. But I think that if you're talking from a need standpoint, immediate safety, long term defensive tackles is the one that jumps out to me.
I gotta say corner, man. I'm sorry. Like I know we're coming off of Amani's maybe worst game, but
in a long time.
But like that highlights exactly why this is such a big need, because the Lions, they banked on and I think you have to throw Mike Hughes into the conversation, because I don't think he was particularly good in this game either. They banked on the fact that Jeff Okudah and safety over top would win, and they did. And they banked on the fact that Amani could take care of Thielen, and Hughes can take care of whoever, KJ Osborne or whatever, whoever's in the slot. And it failed. Like, it worked for a half. And then the Vikings kind of wised up to it in the second half, and it was like, nope, that's not going to work anymore, because it's rough. And listen, I know a lot of people are excited to get Jerry Jacobs back, but I think maybe we need to temper expectations a little bit here.
A lot. We need to temper expectations a lot.
Like, this is
people are expecting him to come in and be the number one, and
right. Well, is it fair to say Okudah's the number one now, right?
Clearly,
right.
Yes.
And so, I think even expecting Jerry to jump in and be even an average CB2, and I don't think he's gonna jump Amani right away. I don't.
No.
That would be a surprise. Maybe they work him in the slot a little bit. I think the Lions need help in the slot right now, because I don't think that's working out too well. That's
a long-term investment too, right?
Yep. So
with Chase.
So I mean, having depth there helps, but you also just need a guy that you can rely on right now. And I think Jeff Okudah is the only one you can sit there and be like, okay, I could see him. Long term, I can see him being a good, maybe a good number one.
Now, I agree with you completely. Now, and Campbell basically backed up what you're saying on Monday when he said, look, ORA had a bad game. That's going to happen.
Yep.
And I think the back injury probably played into that as well. You know what I mean? Like, if your back is seizing up and you can't quite move the way you want, you're going to clutch and grab a little bit. And then when they catch you once, they're going to catch you 6 times apparently. And so,
but not the 7th times for some reason.
Whatever. I mean, who knows? I don't know how to ref in this league anymore. But I think they are confident in Amani. And even when, look, Jerry still has Jerry has one more week, then he has reacclimation. And if you follow the reacclimation process that they've been going through, it's another 3 weeks. Yep. So he has a month, right? Now there's going to be 2 games in a bye, and maybe he's a little further along because of that bye, or maybe he's still got another week after that. But then even when Jerry comes back, Jerry's going to start as CB4 on the outside, and then he's going to have to jump Will Harris. Now, Will Harris is kind of a specialty guy, so that might not be too hard when you're just talking about specific outside roles. But then to jump Amani, I don't know. That's a big ask. Remember, this is a guy we were talking about giving contract extension to, and he won really bad game, and people have just, they can't get off the Amani ship fast enough. It's
right.
We'll see what happens moving forward. Another big matchup this week with 2 Seattle receivers, and so take a breath. I know it stings, and we're looking for fingers to point, but and that's an obvious one. But have a little patience with Amani.
Yeah. Next question comes from Zapper. He asked, after 3 games, what are your updated expectations for the season? Throw out a win-loss.
I don't know. What were we at before? 9-8. I think I was 9-8. You were 8-9.
Yeah.
I'm not. This is where I was. They were supposed to be 1-2, 2-1 coming out of this 3-game stretch.
Sure.
They're going to beat Seattle, and then we'll see what happens in New England. If they're 3-2 going into the bye, then that's exactly where we thought they'd be. If they're 2-3, that's something where you can make it up. So My expectations have not changed. There's a lot of things that are better than what I thought, and there's things that need to be better than what I thought they would be. Right.
Sure.
So I'm not. I haven't changed a whole lot.
Yeah, I don't think I changed off. I can't remember if I officially. I remember in the game by game I said 8-9, and then I'm not
Yeah.
sure if the like right before the season I may have dropped to 7-10. I don't know. Either way, I'm definitely still in
Boo.
that range. Um, because I don't know, like you look at some of the advanced statistics through 3 weeks, and they're pretty much exactly what we expected, I think, of this team, right? Like
Well, a
the
little
offense
higher
has
on
top,
offense.
yeah. I mean, I think we all agreed like the offense had top 10 potential. The one thing we were
Mm-hmm.
still curious about, because again, you can never really tell in training camp or the preseason, like this run game actually going to be legit. And
Yeah.
so far so good, but I think we're coming a little bit back down to reality, and part of that is Swift injury. Part of that is like you're just not going to have 50-yard rushes every game.
Yeah.
Also, so I think above average running game. Goff looks better, certainly a lot better than he did last year. I thought last week was his best game by far, and defensively, I think maybe they're a little bit further behind than I thought they were going to be. They're not. Expectations were fairly
Really?
low.
I mean,
I guess
you think they're further. What's
I-
their DVOA? Do you know this week?
23, 24, something in that range.
Okay. I can remember several conversations where we did Spotify live
Sure.
sessions like this, and we said if they can get into the low 20s,
Yeah.
this is going to be a huge help. Like
You're not wrong.
this was hopeful, right? Like
But
this.
I don't know, like the DVA.
But when you saw what they could become, and then they take a step back,
I think that's part of it. Like I really
Right?
started to believe that maybe this team could stop the run a little bit better than they
Sure.
certainly showed in Minnesota. And I don't know, the game plan in Minnesota was interesting. I talked with it about Justin Rogers. He's tweeted a little bit about it. In fact, he asked a really good question to Campbell about it. And I feel like part of the reason the run game really struggled against Minnesota was actually the tackling of the secondary. Because I feel like if you watch the tape, you look at the strategy, and they were crashing down the edges very aggressively in an intentional way, so that you basically had your corners and your safeties running free up against someone like Dalvin Cook. And I mean that's advantage Dalvin Cook every time.
Sure.
So I don't know if it was sound strategy there, but I don't know. Like as much as I love DVOA, Eric, this is still I think the worst scoring defense in the league right now.
Well, you're about to see a bad defense this weekend.
True.
So
true.
They knew what to do. They said it. They said this backside cut that Cook is going to do is going to kill us if we can't hold it. And they couldn't, and they just couldn't hold it.
Yep.
Like they knew the strategy, but they failed on that execution. And so they just kept repeating it over and over. I mean, like even once they got guys moving laterally, they just use their momentum and just kept. I mean, Aleem was getting washed a couple of times too, and Aleem had a great game for but there were a couple of times when Aleem got washed, and really he shouldn't, at his size and the way he dominates and the way he gets upfield, like he shouldn't be getting caught up in the wash, and even he did a couple of times, and so they had the right idea, they just didn't perform,
didn't execute.
Yeah.
All right.
And that's going to happen. That's going to happen with this team.
Sure.
Like this team is not a team that's going to be perfectly able to execute the strategy on what you need to do.
Right.
Right. Like, and I want to get more into this game. I have a couple of points, but I want to see if they come up in questions before I, take over the whole podcast by myself.
Well, yeah. And the only thing I'll add before we're going to take our first break here is you mentioned the lack of depth, and someone was asking me about that on Twitter this week. Why are they so thin at depth? And I think the answer is because they made a conscious decision that they wanted young players. They wanted to use those depth positions for developmental players. And when you have to speed up that process because of injuries, well, that's when you get a whole bunch of errors and miscommunications and things like that.
Yeah.
That look bad and make your coaching staff look bad, and make your general manager look bad, but it's all part of the learning process of getting those guys up to speed eventually, right?
Yeah, I mean, it takes time. It takes time for these guys to acclimate and develop, and that's, we look at we get into this strategy as fans where we look at the draft and we're like, oh my gosh, if we can draft this guy and this guy and this guy and this, we can have 7 starters. When in reality, it's like you're going to get 1, right? Like you might get 2. Like if you get 2, you're in good shape. If you get 3, great. That's a successful draft. But we sometimes get so enamored with the shiny new objects in front of us that we think like these objects are going to just, and it takes time, and that's the reality of the thing. And so it's going to take time with Kirby. We knew it was, right? Like he only had 1 year as a starter, right?
Yep.
Pascal injury, comes into play, and that hurts. But like, you got one starter in Aiden, you got another starter in Malcolm, right? Like you're getting there. You get one more starter. This is a good draft, right? And it's just a matter of, will someone else rise? Or will you get another guy to step in? But for the most part, most of those guys, a lot of these guys are a year away from really being able to be more impactful.